Then 9 other teens died, all of them having similar symptoms and brains with holes and these protein plaques everywhere. This is when variant CJD got its name and its proof of existence that, yes, humans do, in John Major's terms, get mad cow disease. CJD, but they do get it, or they can get it. Beef sales in England flatlined as the rest of Europe was like, nah, not for us, bro. Supermarkets and livestock dealers stopped buying as well because of this crisis. The government, went on to kill 3.3 million cattle between 1996 and 1999. It's a lot of cattle. This cost billions of pounds, and still there might be some bad news. Just as Kuru could take time to show up after being first infected or transmitted, CJD could do the same. So if anyone had eaten that meat, there's no telling if later they might come down with this.
It's
later
true.
down the
They
road.
could be in their mid-50s by the time it shows up.
Now, Britain's chief medical doctor in 1999, Liam Donaldson, he gave a pessimistic range of under 100 to several million dying of the disease in the future.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Poisoner's Almanac. I am your co-host, Adam.
I'm Rebecca.
And who have you got lounging on your head, my dear?
Oh, this is Koo. Who's your Koo? Like, I think Koo in Scottish Gaelic is actually dog. It's kind of funny, but
Yeah. You've been trying to learn Gaelic, right?
can I pet that dog? Well, I was on Duo, but then I kind of got distracted. But I remember that one.
So did the CEO of Duolingo.
He used to have a great TikTok account. I never see him anymore, but maybe there's a reason for that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But yeah,
There's like several viral TikToks at the moment that are describing how they've completely like scuttled their company.
well, that is so good.
Yep. It feels like somebody at the top is completely disconnected from technology and society, and the person running the socials for Duolingo is like completely with what is happening right now.
Which
And they've been fired.
Oh, well, I've heard that they weren't. I've heard that people who do those social media accounts really don't get paid much either. It's a shame because
Yeah.
they're hilarious.
Yeah. Big shame. So yeah, we were supposed to record yesterday, but we had an interesting evening with our dog, and we ended up staying up very late trying to untangle all that.
With our Koo.
Yes. So we are recording on Saturday instead, but we're here. We're doing it.
Yeah.
So let's jump right into poison in the news.
Mm-hmm.
Let's pull this up real quick. And this is a court case, a legal situation that we have covered before when we were talking about mushrooms.
I think a lot of people are following this case, to be honest.
Yes. Apparently enough for protesters to show up in the courtroom and try to disrupt the whole thing.
Really?
Yeah. This is from yesterday. The headline from ABC News: Beef Wellington and death cap mushrooms. Tragic accident or recipe for murder in a case gripping Australia. Muktuk.
This person is from Australia, though, right?
Oh, I believe so. Yeah. The case is. Yeah.
She didn't know what death cap mushrooms were. What? Why would you go? You know what? Let's let you do it.
Okay. I don't know. So the case actually, the quote unquote incident took place an hour east of Melbourne, Australia in July 2023. Aaron Patterson is on trial for allegedly serving death cap mushrooms in a home cooked meal of beef Wellington to the relatives of her estranged husband, Simon Patterson.
Mm.
So maybe we call that motive. I don't know. You true crime fans out there.
I have heard too that she wouldn't like her kids didn't eat it. Like she didn't let her kids eat it or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. There was a lot that was like, huh, okay.
She has pled not guilty. All three victims suffered multiple organ failure that led to their deaths a few days after the lunch. Simon's uncle Ian survived, but he spent weeks in the hospital.
Mm.
And then the article goes on further to say, in one of the many twists, this is a great piece of writing right here. I just have to appreciate this. In one of the many twists of this fascinating tale of death and cookery,
Not
one of the
cookery.
victims said shortly before passing away that the lunch was actually delicious.
Oh
I
my
mean, that's just
God.
irony. Irony,
Ugh.
irony. The trial's now in its fifth week. The prosecution played a video of Patterson's police interview. A detective said Patterson expressed surprise when she found out that some of her guests had died as police searched her property in the wake of the poisonings. Her computer search history included Patterson looking up a website listing sightings of the poisonous mushroom.
Okay.
Which reminds me of one of America's best, Bob Menendez, former Senator Bob Menendez, who was finally charged and convicted on bribery charges because he took bribes from the Azerbaijani government, and it was gold bars, not cash. It was gold bars. And he literally Googled how much money is a gold bar worth. And that search history was there for the FBI to easily uncover.
Oh, where did that come from?
Eh. The trial is expected to conclude in June, which is literally next week. I love this part. Is sure to be well documented with several podcasts and documentaries capturing every little detail, and they have no shortage of material.
Oh, goodness gracious.
First of all, how dare you? Second of all, the Poisoner's Almanac is the savior of the beaten, the broken, and the damned.
I'm pretty sure that's Gerard Way, but okay.
No, I said it right. No
Yeah,
notes.
like from my understanding, like most people who have lived and grown up in the area know what death cap mushrooms are. They're told, are
Yeah.
warned to stay away from them. It always, and I know that there are people who like still forage today and everything, but like it makes me wonder, like, had she just gotten mushrooms out of a garden before, or this is just the first time I mean, obviously she's been looking up where to find them, but
Yeah.
like, it's not really typical, I would think. You're cooking a meal for your family to go and pick some mushrooms just in the forest and cook them up when you bought everything else at the store too. You know what I mean? Like, why didn't you just, anyway, so there's a lot of weird, guilty pointing things to me, but it's an interesting case.
And finally, one juror has already been removed for possible misconduct while a protest interrupted during court proceedings on Monday as accusations that the murder cases had been rigged echoed through the court. So I'm guessing they think she's either been framed or there's false evidence being planted or something like that. But again, what's the motive there? Like why would the Australian, legal system care to frame this woman? There's no, I don't know. That
Or
doesn't make a lot of sense.
maybe the husband did it because he wanted everybody gone.
Right.
Just
So
kidding.
that is that's the latest in poison in the news. Now let's move on to we have a lovely voicemail from our friend Betsy Rich, as she goes by on socials. Let's check this out. So Blair has left us a wonderful voicemail, and here we go.
Hi, Becca and Adam. It's Blair. And hi, Camilla. I guess you're done school for the summer, which is amazing. I wish my kid was also done. I just wanted to drop a voicemail saying that it was really cool to see the video of y'all opening the box I sent, and I feel bad that the chips broke. I'll make sure to package it better, maybe less duct tape and more box and cushioning for the next one. I just wanted to thank you again for the podcast and for the videos that you post and for being yourselves, because my life has been topsy-turvy this year in positive ways. I just started a full-time job, but the consistency and the joy that comes from listening to the podcast and talking to y'all is really what makes even the most anxiety-ridden moments totally okay, because I can always take a moment, sit back, throw on my headphones, and listen to the podcast or send a message. And yeah, I feel really lucky because of that. So thanks again. Love you lots. Bye. Mwah.
Ah, sweet.
Very sweet.
It was a very tasty box. I'm not gonna lie.
Yes, we are still working our
The
way through
ketchup,
those snacks.
chips. Yeah, they're pretty yummy. Do we have ketchup chips here in America? I don't
Not that I
peruse
know of.
the chip aisle too much here. I know in America we have. I have seen the aisles, the American food aisles, like pictures of them from other countries, and it makes us look so bad. It's bad. I was
Of
like,
course.
wow. I mean, like, yeah, we do have that stuff in our grocery stores, but the majority of us only, but if we eat any of that, it's usually more of a like once a month or I dare you to try it kind of food. Although, you know what, I speak for myself. There might be our fair foods are pretty awful. I know, like people who go to the fair,
Yeah.
they'll get like fried Oreos. No, I can't do that. I've never tried it, and I probably never will because it just sounds like a sensory nightmare. Um, but I've seen some. I've seen some things. I've seen some pictures of what other people think we eat on a daily basis. I promise most of us don't eat that on a daily basis. I can't even eat our famous s'mores because that to me is a sensory nightmare. The mushrooms and the not mushrooms. Wow, I got my head in the Australian case.
Never eat with
Marshmallows.
s'mores with you.
The marshmallows, along with like the chocolate. It's this gooey. I don't like gooey.
Yes.
So
You're killing me, Smalls.
yeah, s'more what?
How can I have some more something I haven't had?
Yeah, but
Um,
good times.
yeah, thank you so much, Betsy. That's such a sweet voicemail. And don't worry about the chips exploding because when you take something up, 30,000 feet in the air, the air pressure.
Yeah.
Somebody left a comment or a message and said, "Yeah, the chip bag burst because of the pressure change." So
Could be.
it's tough to not have that happen.
Then again,
Yeah.
I've seen the way that our postal service handles packages
Yes.
too. Oh my
Yes.
God. Just kicking them.
Oh, and we also got many comments and messages saying for the Aero bar, the chocolate bar, you're supposed to bite it and then let it melt right on your tongue.
My
You don't
goodness.
chew it. You just let it melt, and that's where you really feel the bubbles.
You know,
So,
me and Aaron will try that later. Our friend Aaron loves some chocolate, so I've been splitting the chocolate with her. Yeah, good times.
Story time. I escaped a religious cult 7 years ago. Without going into too much detail here, let me just say it was an extremely difficult journey. My mental health spiraled downhill, and I thankfully had enough presence of mind to seek out a therapist to work through what was going on with me. My therapist helped give me context to all the wild things I had walked away from. He was kind, patient, and guided me through what my new normal might look like. I had never had healthy boundaries in my life. Therapy helped show me that, as a result of being in a cult or a high control group, I had never fully become my own person. It's a shocking thing to learn at the age of 32. I learned how to communicate to the people around me what I was going to do, and more importantly, not do with my time, energy, and resources. BetterHelp is the sponsor of this episode, and they're on a mission to make starting therapy easier. BetterHelp is a platform where therapists and their clients can communicate effectively and get the most out of therapy. There's a journal inside the platform for personal reflection, and there are group sessions on a number of different topics available every day. Starting therapy is easy with BetterHelp. Fill out a questionnaire, and you will match with a therapist in as little as a couple of days. One of the best features of BetterHelp is that if the first therapist doesn't feel like the right fit, you can easily switch to another one until you find someone you really connect with. They carefully make sure therapists on the platform are well qualified, and their customer support team is there to help you if you have any questions. With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.5 rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform you can trust. If you're struggling and think you'd benefit from a therapy session, go to betterhelp.com/almanac or choose the Poisoner's Almanac during sign up and get 10% off your first month of therapy. So that's going to take us to housekeeping. And be sure to follow us on whatever platform you're listening on. Thank you in advance for leaving 5-star reviews. We really appreciate that. I see them piling up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. That acts like a digital tip jar that pushes the podcast further into the algorithms and toward the ears of listeners like yourself. Be sure to follow us on socials. We have links in the show notes for the podcast, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And we are uploading full-length video episodes to the podcast YouTube now, so that you can see all of our screen shares and see our wonderful faces as we unpack all the poison goodness. If you're listening on a mobile device, please screenshot that, post it to your socials, and tag us. We would love to reshare that and interact with you all online. The Patreon is up and running. Let us know what you'd like to see on the Patreon. The link is in the show notes if you'd like to support the podcast through there. Perks. Well, actually, let me mention, we are kicking around adding another tier that will include more perks, and they will include and possibly not be limited to monthly live streams where we all can just do Ask Me Anything or Q&As and stuff.
Do watch parties.
We can do watch parties.
I don't know what we'd watch, but
Severance.
something.
We'd watch Severance.
Or The Labyrinth.
Right. Well, that was what I was going to say.
Or something, poison related. There's plenty. And look, I know of some
100%
killer documentaries.
Oh,
unintended.
Documentaries or The Haunting in Venice. It's so good. It's such a great movie.
There is definitely some stuff we've talked about in it. So.
Yes. So live streams, watch parties. What else have we talked about, babe? I'm trying to remember.
Why do you put me
a private Discord?
Yeah, which I looked into it. I'm learning how to do technology, you guys. I'm learning.
Yeah.
I say I'm learning. It's a process.
Yes. So there's some interaction on the Patreon, but the private Discords are like, Discord is a really fully featured platform, no doubt about it. So yeah, those are at least 3 perks we would add to the next tier. So be on the lookout for that. Obviously, if you're not able to make it to the next tier, don't feel any shame about that at all. You guys' listenership is more than enough for us. Just the fact that you're here listening is fantastic.
That's where I'm gonna stop yawning.
Yeah. And perks for the current Patreon members include weekly bonus episodes, the latest of which was actually me telling my story of escaping a fundamentalist religious cult. It was a little bit different twist. Yeah. It was a little bit different twist. And there's been some dialogue on the Patreon about that episode, which has been fun. So weekly bonus episodes, the option to leave us a voicemail here on the podcast, just like you heard from Betsy. And you also get shouted out by name on the podcast. And those people are as follows: 87 Pens Girl 71, Mara Santiago, Grace Lahan, Genevieve, Nahev Shatreet, Jay Went, Inken Hafner, Kira Yorsek, Tay of Sunshine, Monique, Shane R., Sue Steves, James Mills, Megan Geiler, Liz B., Willie Wolf NZ, Mama G, Nicole Rivers, Richard Miyako, Heather Nolan, Kaylee, Sasha Rubel, Maya Shostak, Maggie Jarm, Ogre de Viking, Lynn Rocket, Brett Moser, Zaid, Neil Houdini, Nicole Crane, Jefferson Vargas, Carmen Q, Sarah G, Knitting Ninja, Estar, Olive Octopus, Betsy Rich, T-Bug, Christine Moljadi, Morgan Brittingham, Blaufrosch, a.k.a. Clara Jurisons, Vix, Anne Maria, Carl Ziegler Jr., Clyde, Jennifer Wilson Richter, Macaulay Sterling, Too Fidgety, Wendy G, Elena MK, Vilma Anderson, Caitlin Martin, Pungrand 101, Minnesota SPT, Tasha, Stuart Slattery, Simone Valdez, Christian Schradergaard, Maria Anna, Bonnie, Oma D, Ryanel Alara, Kristen Arnold, Aaron Carey, Lynn Simpson, Melissa Emmel, Desiree Davis, Jennifer Ramirez Johnson, Dalek Party, The Warped Witch, Sometimes Jules, Mr. Slave, Dizzy Dancer, Creative Otter, Yadmit, Supergirl Sway, Rachel, Anya Brandt, Ebby, Leah Marie Matson, Lady Digitalis, Jesse, Shay 10, Julia Franzoni, Sparks, Gloria Eichmann, Thomas Huff, From Strange to Things, Soy Kasumi, Jessica Gasparini, Robert Jr., Caitlin, which I think I said that right, Ron Mack, Donna Lankanese, Lauren Smith, Anna G., and last but not least, Serpentine Fire. Thank you all so much for supporting the Poisoner's Almanac. And I will repost that link in the Patreon for you folks to leave us our next voicemail. And that is going to bring us to today's topic, my dear. What do we got?
Da, 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 da. Well, last week I know we discussed the horror of familial fatal insomnia. So this infects humans genetically or spontaneously, which is just terrifying. We also discussed scrapie and sheep and how that impacted ideas about science and medicine, since these are not viral or bacterial diseases, but ones involving misshapen and infectious proteins. So prion diseases are a more recent discovery in the context of medical history. That's not to say they weren't around before we knew what they were. You know, they were just considered medical mysteries or even curses before the early to mid 1900s. But another prion disease similar to FFI, or familial fatal insomnia, in that it is found to be familial itself, was discovered in 1936. I'm just going to talk about this one briefly so we can go like into some of the more crazier ones, but I'd actually hadn't heard of this one in particular. I believe it's called Gerstmann-Straussler-Scheinker disease, GSS. It's named for those who discovered it, of course, but common symptoms of this particular prion disease, again, like I said, it's similar to familial fatal insomnia in that like there's a select number of like families that seem to be passing it down. But common symptoms would include progressive loss of coordination that may present as an unsteadiness of gait, so like walking difficulty, clumsiness, and then as it progresses, you have other symptoms that can become apparent, including dementia, in which you would have worsening problems with thought, cognition, memory, language, and behavior. And those affected usually see symptoms in their 40s and 50s, so a little bit younger or close to FFI. And you have your exceptions that may have a case in their 30s. Even I think we've talked about at least one person who had FFI in that family we talked about last week, and she was like 35. So, but GSS is a disease that progresses slowly, much more slower than FFI did. It typically lasts between 2 to 10 years, actually, with an average of approximately 5 years of dealing with this before, it is fatal, so before death. And as of 2017, there were 56 known families carrying this particular prion disease. So that's just another one that's kind of similar to one that we talked about last week. But I want to talk about a few more, mainly about those that infect humans. I will mention a few others that do not infect us yet. Well, namely one that doesn't infect us yet. We'll get to that one. And hopefully it never will. But let's start with Kuru.
I immediately think of the bird flu situation. I'm just crossing my fingers.
Yeah. I hate to tell you, but that's probably more likely to happen than say this crossing over, and this doesn't look great either. Not to scare anybody,
I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I just want to.
I hope it doesn't, but we're not helping the situation by the way we, handle things. So.
You're kidding. We're handling it poorly? Oh my God.
Well, I will say we've known about avian flu for a while now, quite a long time now, to the point where I feel like if we needed to, we could prepare ourselves. Although I don't know if we'd be allowed to prepare ourselves. It's a whole, and I say allowed because of the current situation politically. I know that sounds weird, but medicine is political too.
Yes.
So, anyway, moving on. We're going to talk about Kuru. Now, I struggled to decide whether I wanted to start here or with another one we're going to talk about right after, which was actually discovered before Kuru, CJD, and I'll explain that one in a minute. But that one was kind of discovered in the 1920s and believed to be directly involved in the beginnings of Kuru, but just trust the process here. Okay.
right.
That particular one is going to be a little bit of a bigger, more detailed discussion for us and involve the UK and the US and their histories concerning food and agriculture. So we're going to start with Kuru. Now, Kuru is a prion disease that was discovered in the indigenous people groups of Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea? Yeah.
Papua
New Guinea. When it was first seen among these people by Australian explorers after World War I, it was more of a medical mystery since prions were not yet identified. One group mentioned in the book that I read as one resource describes the Fore peoples there, who were a primitive tribe of the highlands of New Guinea. The Australians found out there were such tribes there and went on like these grand adventures to basically learn about them and introduce the modern world to them, as modern as it was at that time. This was more difficult than they had imagined, as some tribes were not very welcoming, like no kidding, of intruders. But the Foray seemed less aggressive. If anything, they were more afraid of the explorers than anything else, and rightly so, because these explorers showed up with guns and I think they even fired rounds to announce their arrival. So that would be terrifying if you don't even know what a gun is, or
man.
It's like, what the heck. And so I could see why the others would have been aggressive, but that's how you show up. I mean, you show up at somebody's door and you just start blasting.
So, anyways, I started blasting. It sounds like Danny DeVito.
Probably not the most, not the best introduction, I would say, but hey, So, this group of people actually became quite enthusiastic about these newcomers as time
They became
went on,
very enthusiastic about these cucumbers. They were very into vegetables.
Actually, they were kind of an agrarian society, so yeah, it's kind of fun.
So it tracks.
Mm-hmm. Now, they were happy to actually have them around after a while. They were building them huts and learning from them in turn. Like they were just kind of like watching them, observing them, learning from them, that kind of thing. Now, before the Australians arrived, the Fore peoples lived their lives farming sweet potato and taro root, and hunting the forests for meat, that kind of thing. They had some animals, mainly pigs, and there was some warfare present between tribes here and there. What you would normally think of with a more maybe primitive society, but they also had a strange custom of eating their dead.
Heyo.
Now, I say strange, however, it's really not as foreign an idea that you might think. Now, it's been known for a while that Homo sapiens, when they first arrived on the scene, there's been evidence of cannibalism in times of, famine and things like that. So it's not like cannibalism was never a thing. Also, we have, for instance, discussed the idea of mumia, I think we called it, the remedy that involved ground up mummies, or at least the liquefied versions or remains. They would make an elixir or even a liquor of sorts, like mummy liquor. Cool.
Is that what Old Man Marley was making in Home Alone?
No.
All I see is those three boys up against the window, like the bodies. The salt turns to bodies, turns to mummies. Not enough evidence to convict.
what? And honestly, like, and they're just like, yeah. I'm like, no, where would he put them? Where would he put them? Okay.
This was before True Crime Podcast.
And nobody's wondering where these people went. I'm just kidding. Okay. Just whatever. Home Alone's a great movie though.
Yes.
So, yeah, but this stuff was used by Europeans, usually of the upper classes who could afford it between the 12th and 18th centuries. It went on for a little while. We've actually mentioned the 2nd century Roman physician Galen before. And even he has advice on believing that an elixir of burned human bones make a good remedy for arthritis and epilepsy.
My man, getting that money.
So cool. Now,
Cool.
technically, the original mumia in earlier Arabic and Middle Eastern medicinal writings actually referred to this dark asphalt-like substance that was found in the area known as bitumen. Europeans and then others later translated this wrong, believing it was referring to the substance that was kind of given out by mummified remains of those buried or entombed there, when it was decided that the substance was, and then it was decided that the substance was the embalming fluids that were in the belly and skull. That's how it was of those remains, according to a physician from the 13th century. It was also later defined as including the blackened flesh of the mummies themselves. I feel like there should be something in your mind that's like, that does not look healthy. I probably should not eat that.
Yeah, there had to have been one autistic person standing around saying, "Yeah, probably not though. Probably shouldn't."
Yeah.
You know?
No. So anyway, they started running out of actual mummies and, that area, Egypt and all that. And
Unbelievable.
yeah, and so bodies closer to home were used with, the grave diggers and such would literally just go and dig up bodies from a cemetery. Like they would steal them from the morgue, or sometimes the morgue would sell like people who had been executed for this purpose too. So just depended. I didn't say it was legal, but they would. Now, and these would just be labeled as mumia, so the practice could continue. But yeah, a lot. We actually don't have a lot of mummies to research because they were pretty much eaten.
I feel
In the
like
past.
you've told me this before, but this is like it's bringing that back.
Yeah, it's kind of gross. I know. We did discuss a little bit of this, but it tracks because when talking about like the Fore people and like their act of ritual cannibalism, it's I feel like it's important to note that like this isn't just a them thing. Like this is something that people have, like, maybe not the way they did it, but like, I mean, this is still cannibalism, medical cannibalism. So yeah, the Swiss alchemist and physician of the early 16th century, Paracelsus, our friend who essentially stated in his own terms, the dose makes the poison, was also a fan of the idea, but he recommended the body of a man who did not die a natural death, but rather died an unnatural death with a healthy body and without sickness. So you can eat him so long as he wasn't sick. But
Because
he
if
is
he's sick,
dead.
like that's just weird. Okay.
But he is dead.
Like if he was sick, like gross. What are you doing?
Yeah, so I guess at least there was some standard at this point. Now, there were various recipes made by doctors and such when it came to the use of mumia, whether it be from ancient corpses or more fresh ones. These would have been recommended by respected physicians, and a lot of the aristocracy, even royalty, were definitely into it, from everything like wound care to ingesting it for arthritis and epilepsy and more. And like it's like a powdered or a liquid version, but it's still mm. And I don't doubt that someone was probably selling something, calling it that, and it might have been just, I don't know, salt water. I don't know. I'm sure there was plenty of that going on too, but it's just the idea is just like, okay. Now it was finally
But
starting.
those immediately become my favorite people because they're like, well, listen, if you guys are going to go nuts about this, I'm going to make some money.
Well, also like that, and that version, it would be like the snake oil is healthier, I suppose, because it's like, at least it's not human flesh.
It's technically true.
Anyway, it was finally starting to disappear, this whole custom, as an essential medicine in the 1800s, but you could actually find this as late as 1924, when you could get 1 kilogram of mummia for 12 gold marks from the German pharmaceutical company Merck. You just order it.
Shut the front door. They are still a big pharmaceutical company today.
Uh-huh.
That's wild.
Also, my grandfather was born in 1924, so to me that's really not that long ago, like when I think about it.
Yeah. No, it's not. I just want to call Merck as soon as we're done and say, can I get some of those? Can I get some of that mummy juice? You guys got any of that laying around?
But yeah, at that time you could still ask for it, like order it. But medicines considered mummia were created from human bones, blood, and fat, believed to treat many types of illness. You could have tinctures to treat internal bleeding that were made by soaking mummified bodies in alcohol or vinegar. Not going to work, but okay. Powdered skull was used to treat ailments of the head.
This is too good.
And was sometimes mixed with chocolate to treat apoplexy.
Well,
chocolate. Now, even into the early 19th century, Englishmen were still treating epilepsy by mixing like skull with molasses, I guess to make it taste better. I don't know. Okay. So this is just an example of medical cannibalism in history. And even the ancient Romans actually once believed that drinking the blood of wounded gladiators could heal epilepsy. Like everybody had like epilepsy, and like, or they were probably calling other things epilepsy too, but it's like,
yep.
You see so many cures for epilepsy.
Yes.
I mean, it could have been other things causing whatever, this neurological dysfunction was, but
yeah, it's probably just hypoglycemia or something simpler. Orthostatic hypotension. It could totally be
head injury or a meningitis. Yep. Anyway. Mm-hmm. Now, in some later European cultures, drinking the blood of someone stronger or wiser was believed to make the drinker obtain such attributes as the spirit of the deceased individual would lend them their power. Witchcraft. Okay.
As the plot of Highlander dictates, this is true.
There can be only one. No, like there's a story of, I think it's Elizabeth Bathory. Have you ever heard of the story of that story where she was this rich lady, countess, I think. She would invite like all these like virgin girls to like
red
be
flag
her
immediately.
Well, to be her, to like come to her place and like be her maids and stuff, and she would like apparently kill them and bathe in their blood to stay young forever or something. That's the story. I haven't looked as deep into that particular tale. There is some truth to it because she was like, she did some naughty things. So maybe we should go into it one day on a
She pled not
episode.
Guilty, so that was an interesting twist.
So. Yeah. Anyway, I tell you all of this because cannibalism, whether as a means of survival, medicine, or spiritual ceremony, has long been a part of human history. I'm not saying it's a great part of human history. I'm just throwing that out there. Just has been there. So it's interesting when like Europeans start calling the natives of North, Central, and South America savages for these kinds of behaviors. Like they were literally doing this very thing. Also, the idea of these natives doing this was hearsay and was thus applied to like all the people on these continents. They heard like, oh, I hear the natives do this, and so it's like, yep, the natives do this. It's like, okay, you can't just like you can't just like hear somebody. It's like looking at Facebook, reading one thing on Facebook. That's true. That happened, right? Like,
which is how one uses Facebook.
And but here's the thing, even if it was true for like one or more like tribes, like you're doing it too. You're eating mummies. You're drinking mummy juice. Oh my God. Anyway, so
mummy juice trademark.
At least these people were cooking it. I don't know, right. Like it just.
And it's actually a step up if you think about it.
I am not into cannibalism. I'm just saying, like,
Right.
these people were doing the same thing. Now,
Mhm.
for the Fore peoples, the act of cannibalism was seemingly true at some point. Older generations had admitted to such. Their purpose was actually in relation to funerary rites, and it was actually learned from another tribe that they had considered superior to them. So they wanted to learn from them, I guess. So they would actually eat the remains of fallen tribe members as a sign of respect for them. Like they wouldn't kill them and then eat them. These were people who had
Wow.
died uh, of other causes, and then they would eat them. Um, it was basically symbolic, but also a physical act of mourning. Now there were some people who were like, "Also, this is good meat. Why are we going to let it go to waste?" So there was that whole idea too. So it would later be this act of cannibalism, however, that led to the disease that began killing them off so efficiently, as the Australian explorers would observe in the 1950s onward. Last week, I mentioned the name Carlton Gadusek. I don't know if you guys remember him. He was this physician, pediatrician specifically, and researcher who I mentioned had some problems, which we're going to go into more detail here. We'll come back to the problems in a bit, but he would be one of the first to take an in-depth look at what was happening with the Fore. Around 1950, an Australian patrol officer, as the stationed Australians there to report back on the group were known as these patrol officers, noticed that something was off about this group of natives they were observing. These people had learned from them, the newcomers, the Australians, how to dig latrines, how to plant new crops like coffee. They had given up war, certain spiritual rites, and even the eating of their dead. So, like, they'd been like, oh, we shouldn't be doing this. We'll stop doing this.
Wow.
Right. So at this point, they were like, okay, we won't do that. Now, some suspected this last issue carried on with some behind the scenes, like maybe some of the older,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
Now, A.T. Carey, the patrol officer, one of the patrol officers, he began to notice such oddities as the lack of females present as well. Like there just weren't many women. He didn't see many sick people. Um, and then he realized that there were actually several deaths that had happened nearby. Like I'm not sure if they were just kind of like not showing that side of, you know, their culture or their society, but now, the lack of women was for another reason. Well, you'll understand that in a moment. But these
Is it the male
particular,
loneliness epidemic?
I mean, this would have caused that, I guess, in this group of people because there's no more women. But he basically realized there had been several deaths nearby, and he noted that the natives suffer from stomach trouble. They get violent shivering, and they die fairly rapidly. He and a few others were of the opinion that poison was the cause. Like he was like, oh, maybe they're either accidentally poisoning themselves, or maybe they're eating something they're not supposed to be eating, or maybe somebody's like poisoning these people. And
Hmm.
so he and a few others were of the opinion, like I said, that poison was the cause. Another patrol officer on a later patrol in 1953, you're going to love this name, John MacArthur.
Sorry.
I just figured I'd give you a minute to laugh about that one.
Just take a drink while I'm doing this. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, as I mentioned many times, I escaped a fundamentalist Christian cult. And John MacArthur is a figurehead in one of the splinter groups of fundamentalist Christianity known as the Reformed Church,
He
or
mean
people with
too.
Reformed theology. He is mean as a snake, and he's a terrible person. So the fact that that name, um, is happening right now is very humorous to me.
Anyway, yeah. So, but he was
I hated him while I was still a part of the cult, if that tells you anything.
he was mean. He was not a nice
Yeah.
person.
I was not part
Um,
of the reformed side of things, but I still know he's a piece of garbage. Let us continue.
Now, this was in 1953 when he was noticing some stuff. He saw the problem as well, noting that Nearing one of the dwellings, I observed a small girl sitting down beside a fire. She was shivering violently and her head was jerking spasmodically from side to side. Upon investigation, he would be later told that by the locals that she was a victim of sorcery. They also told him that the shivering would continue and she would be unable to eat until death claimed her within a few weeks. So this is what they were like, the locals, the natives, they were like, well, this is being caused by sorcery, which to them was the only like explanation. The Fore called this illness Kuru, which meant shaking to them, like shaking, because there's a trembling element to it. Now, it was believed by them at that time that a practitioner of sorcery would bury like a bundle of leaves and something that belonged to the victim, like something personal, and then come back and shake it to cause this curse to come upon them. So that was what they were thinking caused this. Now, at first, the issue was believed by those observing, the patrol officers, to be like some sort of mass hysteria, and leave it to a group of men to be like, yep, hysteria.
Yes.
Girl sick, hysteria.
Uh-huh.
Now, as the deaths from this mysterious shaking increased, they did send for a doctor. His name was Dr. Vincent Zigas. Dr. Zigas noted the symptoms upon seeing various cases. There was shivering, even though nobody was cold, the eyes becoming glassy, becoming cross-eyed even, losing their balance, holding their heads in a strange way, and becoming clumsy or falling down pretty often. And this seems kind of related to or similar to Scrapie and the sheep, right? They were holding their heads strangely. They
That's
were
exactly what it sounded
falling
like.
down, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if questioned, those who were ill would just giggle or laugh in this sort of anxious, involuntary response, right? And this has even been called
just a description of the Pentecostal church? Like, I'm not sure.
No. This is involuntary, first of all.
There you go.
And this is actually, it's also been called like the laughing disease by some, because like they just, it's kind of strange, but
yes. Yeah. Okay.
Now, Dr. Zigas sent blood samples and even a brain of a dead Kuru victim back to a lab set up in nearby Port Moresby, but nothing was found, according to the tests that they were able to do. When their best lab in Australia looked for signs of bacterial or viral illness, they found nothing. There were no antibodies. It was also observed that women and children were more affected than the men. Within 5 years, there had been 600 deaths from this illness. So just a lot of deaths. And here in comes Dr. Carlton Gadusek, who was this high-achieving alumna of Harvard Medical School. He had studied under like 3 Nobel Prize winners. He was ambitious and determined to figure this thing out. Now, he took numerous blood samples, sending them to both American and Australian labs, and he interviewed the Fore people who he had gotten to basically trust him pretty quickly. Within a month, 200 more had died of Kuru. So it's pretty quick. A lot of people are dying from this. Like Dr. Zigas, he sent brains for analysis, noting that there's something neurological going on, but with nothing of note returning. So he hypothesized certain causes. He was trying to figure out what's causing this. And at first he was wondering if maybe it was the smoke that filled their huts, maybe contamination of the drinking water, maybe a toxic fruit or plant or something they might be eating. So he noted similar symptoms of losing coordination and balance, falling over, becoming cross-eyed, becoming confused and aggressive, emotional instability, and also like this sort of having this euphoric grin or euphoric smiling or even shrieks or laughter, that kind of thing. Now, he noticed similarities to delirium tremens, but like DTs, but these people did not drink. They didn't drink alcohol. He also thought of African sleeping sickness, basal ganglia disorder, and ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. He tried treatments involving cortisone, phenobarbital, antihistamines, vitamins, hormones, and certain antibiotics. Nothing seemed to help. The women and children were still affected more than the men. As such, the men were starting to look to like other tribes for wives. I mean, there's your loneliness epidemic, I guess. Like things were starting to, there were no wives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the only break in the case for a while was that the American lab saw in the brain sent to them by Gadusek, like they had noticed evidence of severe neurodegenerative disease. And this doctor at the NIH at the time, his name was Dr. Igor Klatso. He wrote that he was reminded of another illness, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. I know sometimes here in America we say Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. I've heard both, but from what I've learned recently, it's Creutzfeldt-Jakob because they were both, these individuals were both German, actually. And we're going to go over that one in more detail too. But he noticed like this kind of reminds me of this other illness we've been seeing. So still stumped, Gadusek, he kept sending labs and kept wondering about what could be causing this illness, causing these deaths. His best guess at the time was protozoan type infection, or it just, it couldn't have been some sort of bacterial or viral infection. There was no immune response taking place, no fever, no antibodies found in the blood. It finally occurred to a pair of anthropologists who didn't have the hindrance of like needing to think within certain scientific parameters, pretty much, like of the physicians of the day. Robert and Shirley Glass, they were there to actually work on a sort of family tree or genealogy of Kuru victims, as it was also suggested that maybe there's some sort of genetic issue at hand. Now, by getting to know the women who had been the most affected by the disease, the connection was made between these older acts of cannibalism that had been going on for like 50 years prior to the Australians showing up and the disease. They were able to look back at the history and see that once the tribe had begun to end this practice, not fully really until about 1960, it's believed, the younger members were dying less. It became only like elderly women and sometimes men who were dying from it. And prions, I know we talked about last week, prions can kind of be delayed when it, like prion disease can kind of be delayed when it, between like time you've been infected versus time you see signs and symptoms or that sort of thing. So even Gadusek had written about a Kuru victim's body being fed to children in the area, like just weeks after his arrival there. So some of it was still going on even when they were there. Now, the secret to understanding Kuru involved a latent problem, as the disease often showed up years after, I said, infection or transmission. As you know, it's a transmissible Spongiform encephalopathy. It's what like this grouping of illnesses is really called these days. Prion diseases or TSEs. So Gadusek had come to call it a slow virus, unable to give up this idea that it was viral. Like he really didn't want to.
Yep.
He might have heard about like protons. He might have heard of like proteins doing some funny stuff or prions, but he really had a hard time believing in that sort of thing. So now he would end up back in America, still studying this disease, infecting primates with diseased tissues, looking at their symptoms, then their brains after they died. In 1959, a veterinarian pathologist saw an exhibit of Kuru and sent a letter to Gadusek saying it reminded him of Scrapie and sheep. But Gadusek was like, okay. And he just kind of kept trying to find evidence for his slow virus idea. Now, his rival, Stanley Prusiner, who would go on to define prions and the disease would be labeled a prion disease, such as FFI or CJD, it was then realized that the cannibalism was common among the Fore before the Australians showed up, and probably a little after too. And this had likely started the epidemic among them. So it was theorized that a person with sporadic Creutzfeldt-Jakob Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and I'm saying it wrong,
There we go.
died and was eaten by other members of the Fore in brain tissue alongside other parts. And it's believed that this would have caused infection to spread and then pass down to others who were eaten after death as well. So it's just like this, okay,
Mhm.
it's transmitted after eating the tissues of someone who had Creutzfeldt-Jakob, and then that person dies, they eat him too. That person dies, they eat him too. You see, so it, yeah.
Yes. They keep it going.
Yeah. So yeah, the death toll from Kuru as of 2007, when the book I was reading was published, was around 3,000. According to the NIH, the last recorded case was in 2005, though some have argued that it was in 2009. A quick note on, and it ended because like we haven't seen any cases since, because I mean they've stopped the whole cannibalism thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, a quick note on Carlton Gajdusek. I told you he had some problems. He did win a Nobel Prize in medicine in 1976 for showing new ways disease could be infectious, basically proving that Kuru was indeed infectious, even though he wasn't sure how at the time. He actually was later charged with child molestation in April of 1996.
Oh dear.
He had long been a pedophile, as evidenced by some of his diary entries. He kept an extensive diary, apparently. And after he returned to America, he would later have like 56 mostly male native children from New Guinea come and live with him under the guise of helping them to have an education and a better future. Anyway, one of these boys would later accuse him of molesting him, and Gajdusek readily admitted to this. And he also approved of incest, I guess, like he was just outwardly
terrible.
So then others came out saying that he had molested them as well. But he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to only 12 months in jail.
Yikes, bro.
With a plea deal. Mm-hmm. Followed by 5 years of unsupervised probation that he was allowed to serve in Europe. So he just, Anyway, he died in 2008 in Norway. So he's no longer around, but it was like, that's it. Okay. Anyway, and there were some people who came to his defense. I'm like, okay, yeah, he's smart. He's also a child molester. Just because he's smart does not excuse any of that. And I think I actually sent you a picture of someone with Kuru. Did I send you a picture of someone with Kuru?
Yes. Let me check that out.
Before we move on. It's kind of morbid.
Is it a child?
Yeah.
Yes, I'll show you.
Women and children were affected most.
Yeah. That's a child with it.
Yeah, and so like he can no longer stand on his own. You see how his head is in a fixed sort of place there. They stopped eating. It's very sad, but thankfully it's been figured out where it comes from. They haven't had cases since 2005 or 2009, depending on who's right about that. And hopefully we never see it again.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm going to move on to Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. This, I think some people probably know this by another name, mad cow disease, although mad cow disease typically refers to bovine spongiform encephalopathy. So when it's actually in cows, but I feel like in the media, mad cow disease, like people are like, oh, that person got mad cow disease. And it's like, actually they got Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease from possibly eating a cow that had bovine spongiform encephalopathy or mad cow disease, as named by a journalist at one point. So the thing about CJD, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, is it's been said that it can be sporadic or transmissible this way. There's a few ways they've said that you can get it. There are people who think that no, it's not sporadic, and that just, we're going to go over all that, but it gets confusing. So, but I'm going to explain what people have said too. This is the one that you had the clip for, I think, with someone sent us the actual pronunciation.
Yes.
As Creutzfeldt and Jakob, these were two individuals. They were German, either German physicians, German pathologists who discovered
so somebody
this illness.
Somebody out in Facebook land actually found a native German speaker to pronounce this correctly for us. So here it goes. Okay, I'm going to loop it a couple of times here.
Creutzfeldt Jakob. Creutzfeldt Jakob.
Yeah. And some of you may have heard it said Creutzfeldt Jacob disease. Because I know
Christmas tree John.
Because we do pronounce things differently, but it's Creutzfeldt Jakob because these were two neuropathologists who kind of discovered what this was. Now, this one you may have heard of likely because of the news, because it's been unfortunately too prevalent in an animal that many modern people eat, cows, as well as in humans who have eaten said infected cows. So some of you, like I said, have probably heard it called mad cow disease. This term was coined by journalists during an outbreak. We'll discuss that momentarily, but the history behind this particular prion disease involves mystery, greed, corruption, and government cover-up. So,
like, share, and subscribe.
Now, CJD, as I'll call it, is a human disease. The illness in cows was first called bovine spongiform encephalopathy, as I mentioned, or BSE. The first recorded case of CJD in humans was in the early 1900s, as noted by the German neuropathologist Alfons Maria Jakob, who described 6 middle-aged patients who were exhibiting symptoms of spasticity and dementia with neural degeneration. They had lost the ability to walk, they became disoriented, they twitched and suffered dementia before dying. A year later, another neuropathologist, Hans Gerhard Creutzfeldt, reported something very similar. Creutzfeldt had a 23-year-old patient named Berta who was having some disturbing symptoms, including dementia, skin redness, losing the ability to walk, shaking, screaming and shrieking, hallucinating, laughing uncontrollably, and finally becoming feverish as she fell into a coma and just later died. She never came out of the coma. So now, an examination of her brain later showed severe neural damage. By as early as 1922, this grouping of symptoms was being called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or CJD. Now, the first case of BSE showed up in cows in the UK in the 1980s. Technically, signs of the disease were showing up there like in the 1970s, or so it's believed. They just weren't really identified as being something, I think, novel until probably a decade later. But dairy cows that are usually pretty docile were becoming aggressive. They were kicking the farmers. Cows began trembling and walking unsteadily in the fields. They were losing their balance and falling down and not getting back up. Some simply would just collapse and die. So cows had suffered other ailments before, especially vitamin deficiencies like magnesium deficiencies that could also cause shivering and convulsing in cows. So for a while, farmers would just call this grass staggers. Oh, that there cow, she got the grass staggers, right? At least that's probably how we would say it over here. I can't do an English accent. I'm sorry. So something about these sick cows was different, though. They started licking themselves neurotically, similar to how the sheep with scrapie would scrape themselves, trying to like scratch this invisible itch. They would also smack their lips when like patted in certain places, kind of like the sheep with scrapie did if you scratched under their chins. The cows were even holding their heads strangely like the sheep did, so there's a lot of similarity there. Now, this was not just a health issue, but an economic issue. So to avoid losing money on a cow, farmers would send sick cows to be slaughtered and used for food as soon as they showed signs. So it was like, oh crap, if they die, we can't we can't legally be sending it to the slaughterhouse. So like if the cow dies on the farm, they can't be legally used for food. So they were quick to just send them off if they showed any signs or symptoms. So like as long as the animal could walk when it got there, it was fine. They could use it for food. So yeah, by the 1980s, the number of sick cows rose, and so did the attentions of vets and others who were like seeing what was happening. It was also being noticed that more and more sick cows were being sent off to market. Now, one veterinarian, Raymond Williams, took investigations into his own hands, and he examined the brain, liver, and part of one of the stomachs of a cow that he noticed was sick and he had slaughtered himself. He sent these organs to various labs for further analysis, which only resulted in non-specific findings. Another veterinarian, David B., in a nearby county was seeing similar signs in cows as well, and he was also getting negative or non-specific results on tests that he had been trying to send out. Now, he eventually sent a live cow with symptoms to a government veterinary lab. You know, I imagine he was just like, look, I'm not making it up. Look at him. Something's wrong with him, right?
Yeah.
And after seeing these symptoms, this particular agency euthanized the cow and collected the brain tissue samples to view on slides. In 1985, whoop, whoop, the year I was born, Carol Richardson, who was a vet pathologist working there, she viewed these slides and saw what she believed to be scrapie in a cow. Like, this looks a lot like scrapie. So she had seen sheep brain slides that had the same pattern of holes within them, and this just matched what she had seen then. So she took these slides to a colleague. His name was Gerald Wells. Gerald, for confirmation. But he was like, nah, it's probably a fungal infection or whatever, right? Now, 6 months later, a different veterinarian, Colin Whitaker, noticed cows on a farm becoming increasingly aggressive, charging, biting when approached, or if herded towards milking stations, you know?
Yeah.
A lot of weird behavior. So 2 more brains were sent to the government lab where Gerald, the colleague I had mentioned that brushed off Carol Richardson's theory, examined them and identified them as scrapie in a cow.
No way.
And he was like, yes, I am going to make medical history. And he also said that he had no recollection of Carol showing him what she had found months earlier. So,
Oh, what a jerk. Come on.
Gerald.
Gerald, how'd you like to lie down on this rock?
Anyway, but cows were not the only bovine creature being affected at this point. Vets at zoos were also seeing Nyala antelopes come down with odd and disturbing symptoms as well, very similar to the cows. Once the brain of the animal had been removed and examined, it too was found to have holes like these cow brains had. Now, those thinking of the economic side of things began to really worry at this point, because after the sheep scrapie debacle years ago, America had like banned the import of British sheep in 1950. As well as the consumption of meat from scrapie infected sheep in 1976. I mean, duh. Just seems like I don't want to eat that, right? Now, this was an economic loss for Britain even then. So the higher ups at this point were like, let's keep this on the down low, because if it hits the news, it could cause panic and distrust in the food market over meat and cause other countries to ban beef as well, coming from us, right? And we won't get that money. Scrapie had not crossed over to humans, but no one was sure about whatever this was. I feel like, I mean, I've never eaten, I don't think I've ever eaten sheep, but I've definitely eaten a lot of cow in my life.
Yeah,
honestly, sure. After reading this book, I don't know that I want to eat cow ever again. But also cows, cows are cute. I could never do the dirty work myself. I can't even squash a bug without feeling horrible. So like, I can't like think about a cute fluffy cow or a cute cow of any sort and be like, I'm going to go have a steak. I can't do that. It has to be very separate from me. But anyway, even if this was Scrapie and a cow, and Scrapie had not yet passed to humans via sheep. Could it pass from cow to human, right? So within another year or two, by May of 1987, really there were at least 19 confirmed or suspected new cow disease like this. While keeping things under wraps and hidden from the public, an epidemiologist was brought in to assist in answering some questions about the disease. This was John Wilesmith, and before this, he'd been working with badgers with tuberculosis. It's fascinating. And
Calling
because
John Green, paging John Green.
So because he worked for this agency, like they could make sure that he kept things quiet, while he was doing this. And for reference, at this point in 1987, Scrapie was still not all that well understood. So even Scrapie was kind of like, we think we know some things, we don't know everything. So what was happening in cows right now was being kept a secret, and the investigation would not be very easy considering how much human involvement there really was with cows. So you have so many different variables to look at. The answer could lie in what they're being fed, maybe what they're being sprayed with to prevent like insects, what could be in the pastures they're eating from, what they're exposed to when housed or milked, or, maybe what remedies or vaccines they're being given for various ailments, that kind of thing. So another thing to keep in mind was the fact that it was still perfectly legal to send a sick cow to the slaughterhouse for later use in food, so long as I said they could walk well enough. It was now observed in the brains of sick animals that along with holes and gaps, there were also these amyloid plaques that had built up, basically clumps of dead brain protein built up. Secrets like this can only last so long, as you can imagine. And one of the veterinarians I mentioned earlier, Colin Whitaker, who was looking into the issue, he brought his findings on the matter to this conference of British cattle veterinarians. Like they had a conference. And others who had seen the same thing, including David B., that other veterinarian I was mentioning, they were like, oh my God, I've seen this too. So the issue began showing up in farm journals and then the Daily Telegraph in October of 1987, who put it in there with this statement: a mystery brain disease is killing Britain's dairy cows and vets have no cure. So if that's not going to cause panic, as you can imagine, with someone with having some experience of the media becoming involved in any news about a possible medical epidemic, this blew up and forced the government's hand, basically leading the vet agency involved to name the mysterious brain disease. Anything that sounded better than mysterious brain disease was no cure, right? And so...
So you're going to suffer, but you're going to be happy about it.
Yeah, so yeah, they were like, well, we need to name this so it doesn't sound so scary. So they named it bovine spongiform encephalopathy. Now, this name sounds more complicated than scary. People are like, okay, that doesn't sound as scary as mysterious brain disease. Whatever. They certainly didn't want to throw the new word prion around like this, as it was, gaining traction elsewhere in connection to other serious neurological diseases, including some now affecting humans at this point. They also did not like the name that journalists were giving it, mad cow disease, which was coined by the Sunday Telegraph, and it just sort of stuck, right? They weren't a fan of, but it's like, here's the thing: you kept this a secret for this long, you could have had control of how it was, put out there. But you know what? Here we are. Now, I mentioned the news specifically mentioning dairy cows, and it was true that those particular cows were more affected than herds that were meant for meat. Now, the cow... why did I write this? The cow was now out of the bag. Y'all, it was like 3 a.m. when I was writing some of this because I could not sleep this week. The cow was out of the bag. Get it? Apparently, I'm funny at 3 a.m.
The cow was out of the bag.
And while there were just offers and resources to help, like from like America, other places, I think Scotland was like, hey, we have some of these, like, I think antibodies or whatever that we've made that we had sent to us. You can test your, cows and see if they have prion issues or whatever.
Oh.
But they were like, no, we don't need your help.
Yeah, probably not. That
Um,
that 100% right answer you got, don't need that.
yeah, the British government was like, no, we're good. I think they just didn't want even more attention being called to it. But it's like,
Sure,
okay.
they're trying to avoid panic, but it's like, well, the best way to do that is to be 100% honest and upfront with the public. That's actually how that works.
And learn what's going on, So more and more cattle became sick. 32 confirmed, 96, not him, he's fine, and 96 suspected cases over more than like 50 farms. And this is by November of the same year, 1987. So like it's just ramping up. And these cows were still being milked, sent for slaughter for food markets as well. That epidemiologist I mentioned, John Wilesmith. I know there's a lot of Johns. You're a John, actually. Fun fact, John is his first name. Anyway, he was hired, the guy that was hired by the agency, basically to figure out what the cause of origin or the origin was. He was starting to realize something similar in these sick animals' feed. So what they're being fed. Farmers, well, some of them, kept record of what the animals were fed. And Wilesmith noticed that he saw something called cake in the parlor repeated throughout various farmers' records. Now, parlor in this instance meant milking parlor. So like the milking stations. And cake referred to the high protein snack / supplement that the dairy cows were being given while being milked. Now, around this time, another zoo animal died. It was a Gemsbok this time. It's a similar creature. And it was confirmed through necropsy that it had died of spongiform encephalopathy. What was the connection? These zoo animals were actually were dying alongside the cows. Maybe not as many of them, but they've got a problem here too. So something must be connected. Well, these animals were also being fed protein supplements. There was a recent change, however, in these supplements. To save money, soy protein was substituted.
What was that?
I'm so tired. Was substituted for meat protein. Specifically, they were using sheep parts and sheep brains to make these protein supplements.
I can see where this is going.
And they were lowering the temperature that they were using, that they were heating it to as well. So,
Right.
For a little background on this supplementation, we have to compare the cow and sheep industry. Last week when we discussed sheep with Scrapey, we mentioned that sheep were being bred unconventionally, basically inbreeding. They were trying to produce bigger and meatier sheep for food and the economy overall. So a similar idea was had for cows, but instead of inbreeding, they used a more recent system. Like they were able to like track the best cow bloodlines at this point. Must be a fun hobby, and had like access to the best bull stuff from around the world to inseminate their cows with. So imagine getting that delivery from Amazon or wherever, right? Like, oh, here's your stuff. Now, they used this breeding method to produce stronger cows with specific coloring, stronger jaws, wider nostrils. They made the cows' bodies bigger and stronger so they could produce and hold more milk, so more milk could be sold per cow. They were basically just like altering a species using genetics. So now a cow in the 1940s was only producing about 1,000 gallons of milk in a year. Cows in 1985 were producing around 35,000 gallons per year. So like it was a big difference. Yeah. At the same time, producing this milk, they've got these cows that can produce more milk, but they need energy to do that as well. Cause like producing milk, anyone who has been a nursing mother knows like you need good nutrition, you need food to do this. and they're producing a lot of milk. So, yeah, so they need nutrition, they need energy. So a special diet was made, or, well, a supplement, really, featuring a source of protein that would survive the animal's multiple stomachs, would survive to get into their system. So the original idea to use animal or meat protein came from the German chemist and Pasteur skeptic, Baron von Liebig. Just a great name for I don't know, seems like a great name for a villain. I'm not calling him a villain, but Baron von Liebig.
Yes.
Okay. If there's another Lego movie coming and they need a villain's name, that would be perfect. I'm just saying. Now, in the mid 1800s was when this guy was like, I wonder how we can handle this, how we can use some of this leftover meat, because he was seeing, like, at the time, that these tanning plants in South America were throwing out tons of beef, as they just couldn't do anything else with it. They couldn't ship it anywhere before it went bad at this point anyway. So he thought it would be more efficient to just devise a way to preserve this protein in this meat to sort of help feed the working class in Europe that was growing pretty quickly, and which was also adding to the food shortage of that day. So I mentioned last week there was, the population had boomed, but there was also a food shortage because, like, they had yet to sort of advance agriculture and stuff like that at that time. So he created a cube of protein essence or extract from the plant's leftover animal remains that could just be safely shipped overseas without going bad. Kind of makes me think of like Minecraft cubes, but okay. There's cows in Minecraft.
There are.
They don't have BSE, but anyway. So yeah, people of the working class were pretty much hooked on these Liebig cubes, as they were called by some. But there was still meat going to waste. So to, like, better his profits, he was like, well, let's just add some salt, flavor it a little bit, and sell it as animal feed. That way we're not wasting this, and I get more money. So this later became known as meat and bone meal, was later fed to pigs, cows, and chickens. Horses were like, get that out of my face, because they refused to eat it, no matter how much they tried to make it taste good. They were like, get away from me. Smart animal. Later, you had two different kinds of meat meal. You had the American meat meal, which was made from animal parts that were just not eaten. And then you had the German cadaver meat meal, which was taken from just dead animals that had been sick. So There's that. Those who were concerned about bacteria, as suggested by Pasteur, who again Liebig was not a fan of, were assured that any bacteria on the meat was removed by hot steam in a closed system. What we now know of prions, however, makes this info useless. When studying scrapie, one researcher in Scotland had tried with great frustration to kill the agent that caused this prion disease. And according to DT Max, this was the author that I was reading recently, he found it survived desiccation, dosing with chloroform, phenol, and formalin, ultraviolet light, cooking at 100 degrees centigrade, which is about 212 Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. So, the whole "it's fine, we steamed it" is giving like Rick O'Connell from The Mummy when he's telling the Medjai dudes, "I got him," and the Medjai dudes are responding with, "No mortal weapon can kill this creature" vibes, right? Like seriously, honestly, like that dude from like The Mummy was like my 90s crush for a long time. The Medjai dude.
That's amazing.
Anyway, back to cows. BSE, as we now know, is also a prion disease, and prions are not destroyed by a mere steaming. They're very difficult to destroy. They can go through a digestive system and still survive, and if anything eats what was, left from that other animal, can still be infected, and so on and so on. They survive a lot. Back to cows, though. So this animal protein was working at making the animals bigger and meatier and able to produce more milk. So after World War II, it was actually a government requirement for cow feed to be supplemented with 5% animal protein. They weren't thinking like, oh, this is a problem, this is going to cause problems in the future. So basically, Icarus got too close to the sun at this point. See, this is cow eating cow, or cow cannibalism, if you will.
There we go.
And cow eating sheep. Cow is not supposed to eat sheep or cow. Cow is supposed to eat hanyan. Cow is not supposed to eat meat. No meat for cow, right? We should know this, but here we are. But now that these superior cows were a thing, they required the protein to continue functioning at such high levels because like cows were not usually this big and meaty and were not built this way from the beginning. We had to go and like make them bigger. And I get it, we want milk for the masses or whatever. But like because of this, they needed to be able to give them the nutrition they required. So even more, the people raising them really found pride in the production and size of their cows. And it was not long after this aggressive breeding system and cow cannibalism that cows began to show signs of something very wrong. So researchers would finally trace the source of BSE in cows to scrapey infected sheep meat concentrate added to cow feed. This practice of feeding animal protein to cows was then banned in the area around 1988. So now the options were get farmers to report sick cattle and have them destroyed, and or begin testing if BSE could be transmitted to primates, which would be a good indication that it could be transmitted to us. The latter was approved, being, testing the primates, but the former would require the government to pay some money for the cattle that they would destroy, and they didn't really have the funds. So in order to get these funds, they would first have to have actual evidence that BSE threatened human life. A committee was formed in 1988 to look into the possibility of human transference, and they were able to work out that the BSE, the bovine spongiform encephalopathy, entered through the mouth and traveled through the digestive system, sticking to the tonsils, guts, and spleen along the way. These are like organs that normally try to help with, immunity or getting rid of stuff like that. It also spread to the peripheral and central nervous systems and then traveled on its way to the brain. Now, knowing this, they looked into what food items may contain these particular organs and parts of said cow. So these would prove to be in pasties, meat pies, and some baby foods. Kind of gross. Okay.
Did you say pasties?
Pasties.
Do you mean pastries?
It said pasties.
Did it really?
Yeah. Hang on. Let me see if
what is a pasty?
Let's find out. A pasty, or a Cornish pasty, is a British baked pastry.
I gotcha. I forgot we were in the British context. My apologies to the entire nation of the United Kingdom.
I know what you're thinking of what it would be over here, but no. They are not eating those kinds of pasties. So.
But
yeah. So these parts of the cow were banned for being used, but only in the baby foods. They were like, just take it out of baby foods, leave it in everybody else's foods, fine. So later, organs were altogether banned from human food later, but companies were given some time to replace it with something else. So they were kind of given this time to you got to get rid of it, but nothing urgent. So the pet food companies would also go on to remove meat and bone meal containing such parts. They actually did it quicker than the human food companies did, so it was actually safer to eat dog food for a little while. Yeah, but in 1991, 2 marmosets, these are primates, were exposed to tissues of scrapey infected sheep, and they developed scrapey. 2 others were exposed to BSE, but did not become ill right away, so the government was like, see? But then, within a year, these two actually became ill with BSE too. It just took a little longer. So now, for reference to other countries, BSE was first reported in Ireland in 1989 and Portugal and Switzerland in 1990. By 2005, the number of countries reporting BSE among native cattle increased to 24. So it's 24 countries, mostly within Europe. So the British government still at this time was pushing that there's no risk in eating meat or byproducts and tissues of infected cows. There is no war in Ba Sing Se, is basically how they were treating it. But they had no reason for such reassurance, and it turned out not to be true. Cases of BSE continued to rise to the point of 37,000 cases annually by 1992. So a lot of sick cows. More zoo animals, including a greater kudu, an Arabian oryx, and an eland, had also become victims of the disease. There was an experiment to see if mice could be infected through infected food, and it showed that yes, they can be. So it could easily jump species via food. Not long after, a cat, later called Mad Max, was found to have feline spongiform encephalopathy. This was a pet cat, someone's pet cat. So the cat had showed similar and familiar symptoms, including trouble walking. It would smack its lips when stroked or petted. Max was euthanized. His brain was found to have familiar holes throughout. So after Mad Max, this is like, I guess when like everybody was like, oh no, schools stopped allowing British beef, and I guess Max was the last straw. But many British citizens refused to eat beef after this. This was, of course, what the government was afraid of. With people saying no to beef, the economy was going to take a hit. Then more bad news was announced. A calf had become infected. This meant that somehow an animal had become infected after the ban on feeding animal protein to cows. If they had banned that, then like how, But it was later found out that some of the feed manufacturers and farmers were not following the ban. Equipment at feed companies was not being cleaned appropriately. Farmers were still using up old feed with sheep and cow parts still in them. They were like, well, they didn't recall it. I'm just going to use it up until it's, gone. So they weren't really taking it seriously, I guess. But newer and more specific bans went into law later in 1994, and there was a ban against animal protein in all animal feed that was established in 1996. So it took a little long, but here we are. In 1995, after taking a good hard look into the practices at slaughterhouses, there was a ban placed on the mechanical removal of meat for use in food from the vertebrae of cattle older than 6 months. Infectious prions love a good vertebrae, so it's kind of risky taking the meat in that area. That travels up the nervous system to the brain, that kind of thing. So,
right. That's clever.
Then came a sign of the worst. A 16-year-old girl named Victoria Rimmer had become sick in 1993. So she had fallen sick in 1993. They didn't know what was going on with her. It started with memory loss, forgetting her way home. It progressed to pain through her right arm and neck, as well as a decline in coordination. Her grandmother was actually comparing the way she walked to that of the cows that were suffering BSE that she had seen on like the news on TV.
Oh, wow.
Now, before moving on from here, I mentioned that the first cases, or maybe I didn't mention this, but the first cases like in the 20s that were noticed by Creutzfeldt and Jakob, these were at that time labeled as sporadic CJD cases, meaning they had occurred randomly without any known ingestion of infected tissues. Of course, this is way earlier. They had no idea really what would have caused transmission of this anyway, but they were known as sporadic. As far as is known, at least, that's what I'm just going to put the label as. Now, sporadic CJD accounts for about 80 to 90% of CJD cases, which is just terrifying if you think about it. It's still rare. It's about 1 to 2 people per million each year, but it's 80 to 90% just being sporadic, just happening because, which I'm going to go over that in a minute because it just feels shady, but just stick with me on that. Now, while Victoria's parents and grandmother insisted that she had died of variant CJD, Variant CJD is that transmitted via the ingestion of infected meat or tissues. So you've got sporadic, you've got variant so far. Authorities were assuring the public that no, she had sporadic CJD, just a coincidence, right? However, it's hard to believe for many people because she was 16. She was very young. Sporadic CJD doesn't typically affect young people. The usual cases of sporadic CJD occurred in people between their 50s and 70s. Also, Victoria loved some hamburgers, right? I mean, some independent researchers were actually adamant with news sources that they believed that she had variant CJD, from eating infected meat, and that with so much BSE in human food sources, she would not be the last. Like, they were tired of the media, and so they were like, you know what? These are researchers. They're like, I bet it is. I bet it is from eating infected cow meat. So Victoria later lost her sight and fell into a coma for several years before dying in 1997 at the age of 20. Her family was still told it was sporadic after autopsy, and maybe it was, but so much just doesn't make sense in her case. Around the time she became ill, Prime Minister John Major, it's another John, wrote to another grieving mother at this time, humans do not get mad cow disease.
Uh-oh.
Firstly, cows with mad cow disease can infect humans via ingestion, leading to variant CJD, if we want to get technical.
Yeah.
But he was.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Saying this because he's like, he's not an expert, but he's saying this.
Yeah.
What's up?
It's Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, right? It is spelled with a C?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought because it was a German name, it would start with a K.
Creutzfeldt-Jakob. C.
Interesting. Because you and I both know from being healthcare workers, we still call it an EKG, even though it's an electrocardiogram because it's a German invention.
Yeah.
Just that seems out of pocket.
Sometimes
right
things
there.
just stick.
I thought it would be a K.
Now he was a German neuropathologist. I don't know what his ancestry or heritage was before him. So maybe there's something else.
Sure. Was he? He was like, he didn't immigrate. He was in Germany still when the discovery was made.
I don't know his family tree. I don't know his ancestry.com password.
Yes,
if you will.
So, but I'm thinking of there was a massive amount of name changing or manipulation at
like Ellis.
Oh, yeah, at Ellis Island.
Yeah, but
people's names were changed. Right, but when people immigrated, they would change their names on the spot to prevent them. Try to prevent discrimination or something, or make it sound more American.
Or it might just be like, we're tired of trying to get this right. We're going to do what we want.
Yeah, well, I'll spell it how I want because I got 3,000 people coming through here today.
But they were living in Germany at the time too. So
Gotcha.
I don't know where what his ancestry technically was, but it is C.
Got it.
So now, so Stephen Churchill, another British teenager, died at 19 years old in 1995. Then 9 other teens died, all of them having similar symptoms and brains with holes and these protein plaques everywhere. This is when variant CJD got its name and its proof of existence that, yes, humans do, in John Major's terms, get mad cow disease. It's CJD, but they do get it, or they can get it. Beef sales in England flatlined as the rest of Europe was like, nah, not for us, bro. Supermarkets and livestock dealers stopped buying as well because of this crisis. The government, went on to kill 3.3 million cattle between 1996 and 1999. It's a lot of cattle. This cost billions of pounds, and still there might be some bad news. Just as Kuru could take time to show up after being first infected or transmitted, CJD could do the same. So if anyone had eaten that meat, there's no telling if later they might come down with this.
It's
later
true.
down the
They
road.
could be in their mid-50s by the time it shows up.
Now, Britain's chief medical doctor in 1999, Liam Donaldson, he gave a pessimistic range of under 100 to several million dying of the disease in the future. Now, this range is likely very wide, very large, because the illness was still and is still being studied, right?
You have never heard a doctor better at not getting sued. My man, Dr.
Well,
Liam.
but, like it's still being studied even today. So even at that point, it was
Sure.
like, I don't know. It could be this or it could be that. I have seen various numbers of those who have died of variant CJD. The book that I have been getting a lot of my info from was published back in 2007. And according to the author, DT Max, in that publication, so far 150 Britons have died of variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Other cases have occurred in France, Italy, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, South Korea, and Japan, but these were related to outbreaks there. It says not from British cattle. I don't know how it got there per se. So I don't know if maybe they were feeding their cows this protein stuff too, and maybe they had their own outbreaks or how that happened. But a 25-year-old woman who grew up in England before moving to America ended up dying in America in 2004 of the disease. So she could have like gotten it while she was living there, and then after coming here, she died from it. Now, after all of this beating around the bush and hiding the truth and waiting to do anything about the situation until it was too late, one would think others would see and learn from the mistake made in Britain. Alas, us Americans did not.
Until
We didn't. Okay. And that doesn't surprise me. It doesn't. It does not surprise me.
I must interject with a famous line from Bill Hader in the Night at the Museum movies. We're Americans. We don't think, we do.
He played that role brilliantly too.
He was too good at it.
We got to watch that movie now. It's going to be great. I don't think Camilla's seen the
Agreed.
second one. I can't remember if she has or not. Anyway, so while not a huge importer of British beef or feed, mind you, America had at one time imported several hundred cattle for breeding in recent years at this time. Half of these were traced down and slaughtered out of caution, but the other half were not found. So they were like, well, whatever. Now, this was an era of just loosening up regulations. Slaughterhouses were getting away with a lot of disgusting practices. Honestly, they probably still do. Leaving meat covered in feces and abscesses, dropping meat on the floor, just picking it back up for use. A lot of icky stuff going on. So just FYI, this loosening of regulations led to a rise in foodborne illnesses, literally like 200,000 cases a day at one point. So, and as well as deaths from those illnesses. So I'm just going to point that out for current reasons. Now, as American citizens became anxious. Yeah. So Americans are obviously anxious at this point, right? They've been watching the news, what had been going on in Britain, right? Now the USDA promised to, we're going to test some cattle, but its focus became like the downer cows, which these are like those unable to walk, or they showed up dead, disabled, or ill to the slaughterhouse, which I guess this was happening. Remember, I said that in Britain, so long as it could walk, it could be used for food. Remember I said that? Well, in the U.S., they took all of them. They could be dead on arrival and they would use them.
Jesus.
I'm not sure if that's still okay today, but at the time, yeah, they would use. I'm pretty sure it's not like that today, but yeah, they would just take them. They really only tested, the USDA really only tested like 1 in 1,000 cattle. So they were testing some. And they even said like, oh, it's not our intention to like catch it before somebody eats it. We're just trying to do our due diligence. Or I'm like, what are you doing? Okay. Now in December of 2003, in December of 2003, a downer cow in Washington state tested positive. And right after that, Japan was like, see ya to U.S. beef, because they are like, you know what, we're not going to watch this again. We're not going to be part of this.
No.
Especially because like this population in Japan, their genetic makeup is quite homozygous. And at this time, it was found that such a population was more at risk for becoming infected. They were doing a lot of testing on like heterozygotes versus homozygotes, and like, you know, it's just a fun fact there for you.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
so what did the American government do? The same thing
Nothing.
that the British government did. They assured people there was no problem. Profits were at stake for many a meat producer. One Kansas beef dude, though, he was like, "Well, I'm going to test all of my cattle because I want to be cautious." But the USDA was like, "No, don't do that. Don't do that. We kind of don't want to know." Right? Like, okay. So they shut that down. But more cattle in Texas than in Canada also were found to have BSE. And the USDA did its best to shut down the press on the situation, just like the British government had done. Soon, Taiwan also closed its doors to meat from America. Japan did open up for meat again, kind of after being pressured, but not for long because they were also accidentally sent spinal tissue from a meat packing plant. So they were like, oh, okay, nope. So more cattle with BSE were showing up in Alabama, more in Canada. More recently, in May of 2023, a cow with BSE was identified in South Carolina. The public was assured that it did not enter the food chain. May of 2024, there was a cow with BSE found in Scotland. It also apparently didn't get into the food chain. And then May of 2025, a cow on a farm in Essex, UK, was found to have BSE, and it also was not introduced into the food chain. So that's just some of the more recent findings there. Officially, only 6 cases of BSE in American cattle have been identified. 5 of these were labeled as atypical BSE, which seems like typical BS to me. Okay. Because listen to this. Anyway, atypical BSE was identified in cattle in 2004. This is apparently naturally occurring in older cows. This kind is believed to not be transmissible in humans. But they also said that about the other kind too. Like it just feels shady. Like you guys just want to say, well, most of our cows, it was atypical. So we're safe. Like it just feels like another like way of just whatever. Also, like the USDA was only doing like 1 in 1,000 cows. So like it's like there's probably more and you're just not testing, but whatever. Okay.
Jeez.
I told you it gets complicated and it gets shady. So since the first report in 1996, a total of 229 variant CJD cases, that's through transmission via infected meat, have been reported worldwide. 177 in the United Kingdom, 27 in France, and 25 distributed in like 10 other countries, including the United States. Now, incidents of variant CJD peaked in the United Kingdom and France in 1999 and again in 2004, respectively. UK in 1999, France in 2004. Now, countries outside of the United Kingdom were apparently affected through importation of beef and live cattle from the UK. Only 5 variant CJD cases have previously been reported in North America. 3 were in the United States and 2 were in Canada. All 5 had lived in either the UK or the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, prompting the conclusion that it was acquired overseas rather than in the United States or Canada, which may be true, but it also may just be like, we don't have it. There is no war in Bossing, say, right? There is no Creutzfeldt Jakob in America. It just feels really weird. Like, it feels shady to me, but I'm not trying to get all conspiratorial. It just feels like, okay. Now, I mentioned earlier, sporadic CJD is also a thing. I mentioned that. Coming about in this unlucky random turn of events, which sucks. Like, and I know that there's like sporadic cases of familial fatal insomnia. So it's like, oh, well, it could be a thing, but that sucks. However, there are many like Victoria Rimmer's family who believe the illness has no spontaneous component at all. It's estimated that about 500 to 600 people die of sporadic CJD annually in the U.S., which It's kind of, I know
Okay.
it's rare, but that's still kind of a lot, for something rare to me. Rare considering the amount of people out here, I know, but like we said, we still don't know everything there is to know about the disease, and there has to be a reason. There has been reason not to trust what's been said about this illness in certain places. So, especially with so much money at stake. There are just as many scientists that also believe this, ranging from protein experts to epidemiologists to neurologists. They also point to the fact that there has never been a case of sporadic scrapie or BSE in Australia or New Zealand, ever.
Okay.
So these two countries are also without the infectious form in native-born animals. It's just not there. Instead, they believe, these other scientists and other people believe that infections are misdiagnosed as sporadic, and they may actually be cases of infected beef consumption or contaminated hospital instruments, which would be iatrogenic CJD. There's different forms. And by hospital instruments, I mean, because like prions are really hard to destroy. They're really hard to kill. So if like instruments are just being sterilized in the usual way, these prions may not be destroyed. Also
I mean, but in
contaminated.
that, yeah, in the interest of, I mean, just clinically speaking, that issue has to be solved. Like I can understand like commercial pressure to not really get to the bottom of that, but like you got to know for the safety of
Yeah.
your populace, you got to know.
And like iatrogenic would be like a procedure was done on somebody and they think their tools have been sterilized before going to another surgery. Right.
Right, but you mentioned how like
Yeah,
almost indestructible the prions
it
are.
is. Yeah.
Like they're
It's
resistant to sterilization.
mhm. And now obviously you have like sterile fields and sterile tools that come and they're like one-time use, but then you have other things that may not be. So,
Mhm.
but also contaminated blood products, like say you get blood products from someone who was infected, didn't know it.
Yeah.
Unregulated protein supplements, because that's a thing.
Bro,
Also,
that is crazy. Protein supplements are a huge thing in the fitness community. That's
yeah.
crazy.
So, also even like cosmetics that use beef byproducts, which I don't know, what would that be, like beef tallow? Are people putting that stuff on their face? I don't know. I didn't think about that one, but yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't put that on my face because it just doesn't sound appealing at all. But anyway, and I'm not trying to like discourage, don't take protein supplements, don't do it. I'm not trying to say that. I think there are ones who are regulated, obviously, by third party vendors,
Mhm.
but like there are also some shady stuff that you can get on the internet. You just got to be careful with stuff.
Yeah.
And I would say that about any sort of supplements for different reasons. Now, there was also a strange case of a husband and a wife in America that died of sporadic CJD within years of each other. The odds of that are like 1 in a trillion.
Wow. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's weird. That doesn't
Yeah, that's an
seem like
epidemiological unicorn.
that's weird.
Yeah.
It's also been suggested and in a few cases confirmed that some patients who had died of Alzheimer's were found to actually have died from CJD because the symptoms often overlap. And so like testing has been done on some, and there's actually been a few that were not Alzheimer's, they were actually CJD. There's also been cases of genetic CJD in which a parent had or carried the gene for the mutated prion. Something else to think about, in the US, it's still legal, though there are some regulations in place in certain states concerning dairy cows. It's still legal in some places to feed cows chicken litter. These are chicken droppings.
Oh,
Um,
come on.
yeah, and chickens are still fed cattle protein in some places.
Ugh.
This is concerning for a number of reasons. Even
You need that on a t-shirt.
even McDonald's, the largest user of beef or like buyer of beef in the US, complained about it to the FDA back in 2005. They were like, yeah.
Well, you know what? The McDonald's legal team still has PTSD from that person who got $1 bajillion from them for being burned by the coffee.
I don't know. I heard that was legit though. Like I heard like it was bad. Like, yeah.
Well, either way, they don't want to have to pay out an absolute dumpster full of money.
Did I send you a picture of the brains? The one
Yes.
brain, the MRI?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty good resource, to be honest.
Should I pull that up?
Yeah. So, yeah, this is the MRI of someone's brain who had come down with CJD. So this is actually over a month or two right here of what it is doing to the brain.
That
So
is wild, dude.
yeah.
I mean, it's just that's an absolute truckload of atrophy.
Yeah. So it's destroying the brain.
Mhm.
There is one more briefly, I promise, to discuss that's connected to this, both this and scrapie. It's chronic wasting disease. This is actually found in deer families and has yet to cross over to humans, and hopefully it doesn't. But some of us do eat venison, and some I don't really eat venison. I think it's too muscly, personally. But some do think that just as BSE infected humans causing CJD, chronic wasting disease could do the same someday through eating of infected venison. So it was first identified in 1981. According to my reading, it may have shown up in one of a few ways. First reported signs of such a disease showed up in Colorado in the 1970s, where a decade before, a biologist was working on an experiment. Gene Schoenfeld, I hope I got that right.
Schoenfeld.
Schoenfeld.
How's it spelled?
Schoonveld. So good luck with that. Schoenfeld. He was working.
If any of you listeners or viewers could find a native German speaker, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't even know if he's German, but it does look German. I'm not sure if he is or not.
Yeah,
but
it's like Dutch or German, something like that.
Yeah, because I mean, this is in Colorado. He was working for the Colorado Division of Wildlife.
Gotcha.
Studying deer and their feeding habits, since this area had become more populated with humans. You know, like it's being more. There's more homes. There's more neighborhoods. But with less forested habitat, the deer were often just starving to death because they couldn't find proper nutrition. And the thing with deer is they have to be able to have a certain, I think, amount of like good bacteria in their guts, like for their nutrition to even get to where it needs to go. So it's a little bit different. So he was trying to figure out ways to help the deer, basically. He also had some sheep that he had borrowed to use for comparative study when it came to like feeding and stuff. Now it's believed by Schoenfeld and others that some of these sheep were infected with scrapie. The deer that should have remained healthy were suddenly coming down with a strange illness that made them stumble, lose weight, salivate, and tremble like horribly. Some similar, familiar symptoms. Now, at the end of his study, these deer were apparently released back into the wild, as protocol said to do. Now, 10 years later, in 1977, Spongiform encephalopathy was found in the brains of dead deer near that same area. After more investigation, the issue had spread to other states during this time and to elk as well. It spread to Nebraska, Mississippi, Wisconsin, even New York by like 2005. It was first found in wild moose at the end of 2005. Another reason for the spread has to do with hunters. Now, some are willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars to have farm-grown deer that were made to grow huge with huge antlers shipped wherever they can hunt it, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a pride thing, if you ask me. But
100%. Well, they judge the like catching fish. It's judged by how much the fish weighs. For deer, it's how long the antlers, how the length of the antlers and the number of points, like an 8 or 10 or 12-point buck.
That's so weird. Like, and not to rag on anybody else's hobbies. Like, I get like hunting and like using the food, like for your food, right? Using the meat for your food. I get that. I get it. But it's like when it comes to like, man, I got the biggest, and I got the one with the biggest antlers. I got blah blah blah. And it just feels like, oh, little man with his little gun needs to feel so powerful. You know, like I just don't get it. And I'm not very competitive, so maybe that's part of it too. Like I just don't.
Oh man,
Most of my
that's really
hobbies are
funny.
not really competitive sort of hobbies. I mean, it just
You don't say.
well, especially as like grown men like to, and women do it too, I'm sure. I'm not trying to say this
Oh
to
man.
only men, but like grown people who are just like, yeah, I got my antlers are bigger than yours. I spent $10,000 to get this thing shipped to what's it called, and then I shot it. Like it just, I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't.
Babe, you just like you literally were like, I'm not trying to make fun of anybody's hobby. Proceeds to
Well,
make fun of that hobby.
well, because it's like it's different than your typical hunting to me. Like
Yeah.
I and I
Yeah.
couldn't hunt because I know I would probably just cry because I'm like I
Oh,
said, I can't even
sure.
squash a bug. But like
Yeah.
I understand people who do who hunt and then and I understand that it the deer population can get out of hand. I understand like making sure that doesn't
Yeah.
happen and hunting is not
Sure.
can actually help with an ecosystem. I totally get that.
Mhm.
It's the ones where it's like I need the bigger, better, it's just
Yeah.
anyway, moving on.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was that. So this caused another problem because some of these actually got away, and they would live on, they would breed. So like, how did these farms get these deer so big in the first place? Protein. They were fed feed cakes full of animal protein, especially
Ayo.
downed sheep.
Love it.
So what are the issues at hand with this? This is my final say with this, okay? In
All right.
2000, Byron Coffey, a scientist with the NIH, he was able to get chronic wasting disease prions to infect healthy human prions in a test tube. Now, obviously, this is different than via bodily transmission. This is a test tube. Still not a great sign, though, right? There's still some molecular stuff that's not being looked at. But now in 2001, the USDA declared chronic wasting disease a national emergency due to how far the infected deer population had spread. Like there's just no controlling it anymore at this point. A 2002 Prion researcher in Switzerland, Adriano Aguzzi, he warned that Americans were underestimating the threat of chronic wasting disease. In some states, the population of infected deer has become so great that there have been hunting events every year to just try and get rid of the issue of chronic wasting disease. And like, they don't eat the deer, they're just trying to eliminate those who are infected.
Yeah.
If you want to know how that has gone, one DNR official in Wisconsin in 2005 said, eradication is a nice idea, but it's not going to happen. So now, as of April of 2025, chronic wasting disease has been reported in 36 states in the U.S. Cases have occurred in all 4 regions of the country: West, Midwest, South, Northeast. Animals affected include free-ranging deer, elk, reindeer, and moose. In addition, chronic wasting disease has been reported in reindeer and or moose in 4 Canadian provinces: Norway, Finland, and in Sweden. A small number of cases have also been found in South Korea. The disease has also been found in farmed deer and elk, so it doesn't matter if it's like wild or farmed. Now, CDC expects the disease to continue to spread in the continental U.S. It is possible that chronic wasting disease may also occur in other states, but cases just haven't been detected yet. Once chronic wasting disease is established in an area, these prions stay in the soil and water for years. Like they just get like put into they get pooped out, right? And they can infect anything that comes along that might ingest whatever's there as well. So it's a problem to just be watching. Not telling you to not go hunt deer or to eat your venison. I'm not telling you that. I'm not telling you that. I'm just saying, good to kind of keep an eye on like what's going on where you live and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, that's my my little bit on chronic wasting disease. I wanted to mention it somewhere. So here we are. Because I know there was a big, I know I talked a lot about cows.
Yeah.
So
and I should mention, I befriended a wildlife biologist here in our area, and I had a short conversation about what's happening with the deer population in the state of Georgia.
yeah.
And that prion disease has been discovered among deer population and all sorts of fun stuff. It was a good conversation. And he was, I actually asked him if he'd ever been a guest on a podcast. And he said, yes, I have. It was a podcast about bicycling. He's a big bicycle guy, but
Cool.
he might be our first guest ever. We'll see. We'll see if that
That'd be
shakes out.
cool to see kind of his take on everything. And these are like, I know I've been calling them different names. I've been calling them prion diseases. You may also hear them called transmissible, spongiform encephalopathies.
TSE.
Because they are, they're transmissible. They are spongiform encephalopathies. But they're like, you've got the bovine kind, you've got this kind, you've got that kind. So, but prion diseases, I feel like a lot of people not involved in the science community know it by prions, too, because they're scary, So that's.
And this gentleman, his training is in wildlife biology. He is also a self-taught software developer, and his actual day job now is he has built a digital app for independent grocery store chains to track all contributing products to their ground beef production, so that if the USDA requires that grocery stores trace that in case infection or an outbreak happens, so that they can go right to the source as quick as possible. So he built an app to help the grocery stores catalog all of their, all the contact tracing possibilities.
The USDA is like, some of you may die, but that is a risk I am willing to take. I'm just kidding.
That's right.
But I mean, I get it though. They want to make sure, like, if something were to happen, they can like catch it immediately. So I mean, that's a smart move. But it's a wild ride. And I knew CJD was going to be a wild ride, between like the history of the covering up of like, well, let's try to figure out what this is before we make everybody panic, and then all of a sudden panic happens anyway because it's not slowing down, that kind of thing. So, but yeah,
that's right.
Here we are.
Awesome. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this episode of the Poisoner's Almanac. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.